Hey everyone, welcome to today's webinar. We're happy to have you here. We're going to be discussing how to raise $1 million or more with a capacity campaign. So excited to have Amy and Andrea here with us today. My name's Bradley and I help lead the marketing efforts here at Kindful. And I'm just going to give a couple quick housekeeping notes, then hand the presentation right off to Amy and Andrea to let them take you through their content here. So a couple quick things just so you're aware of. Number one, this session is being recorded, and we will be sharing the recording and the slide deck in an email to everyone who registered later today. So be on the lookout for that, but no need to take feverish notes if you don't want to, because we'll send you the recording. So if you want to share it with a board member or a colleague or a friend, you can feel free to do that. In addition, we do want to keep this session, Amy and Andrea both said they'd love to keep the session kind of conversational. So if you have questions throughout, just feel free to drop those into the questions tab over on the GoToWebinar control panel. And we will answer as many of those questions kind of as we go, as we can. Next, we're going to be asking a couple of poll questions throughout, so we'd love for everybody to participate, so look out for those. But without further ado, really excited to get into this content. So Amy, Andrea, I'll let you take it from here.
Great, thank you so much, Bradley. We're excited to be here. Welcome, I'm Amy Eisenstein, and I have my co-founder of the Capital Campaign Toolkit with me today, Andrea Kihlstedt. And we are just going to dive right in. You can feel free to look up our bios at thecapitalcampaigntoolkit.com if you want to know more about us. Today we're going to talk about how to raise $1 million or more with a capacity campaign. We will talk a little bit about what a capacity campaign is, what a capital campaign is, and if there's a difference. But we're going to start off with a poll. So let's go ahead and launch that first poll, Bradley. So we're going to want to know, how often does your organization have a campaign? So maybe you've never had one, or you have one every 5 years, every 10 years, every 15 years. So let's see what the audience says. So it looks like a lot of you have never had one, or you've had one every 15 years. The vast majority of people. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds or so to answer this question. All right.
Well, Amy, we've got a group of newbies here with us. How great and exciting is that?
It's excellent. And you know what? That is the norm. So if you've never had a campaign, the vast majority of you, a few of you do have campaigns sort of regularly, but you are not alone. The vast majority of nonprofits have campaigns fairly infrequently. That's the nature of this type of fundraising. And so we are delighted that you are here today. All right, so here's our agenda for the day. Let me go to the next slide here. So in the next 45 or 50 minutes or so, we're going to talk about the difference between a capital versus a capacity campaign, what that means, what that looks like. We're going to talk about how campaigns work, and we're also going to talk about or give you a roadmap to $1 million capacity campaign. So we're super excited to get going on this. Andrea, why don't you start us out by talking about what the difference between a capital and capacity campaign is?
Yes, thanks, Amy. It's nice to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for joining us today. So let me start by saying, that the coin of the realm, the way people talk about this business, is that they use the phrase capital campaign to mean pretty much, well, many people think it's only about a building campaign, but really we think about it as any kind of a campaign that raises extraordinary money over and above annual operating through special gifts that move the organization's mission forward. Now, if you look at this slide and you look on the right where we say capital campaign, right, though people, the phrase is kind of a confusing phrase. If you want to get very specific about it, a capital campaign usually raises money for some kind of a big capital improvement. a new building or campus or wing of a building, right? When we think about capital improvements, you might think about a capital campaign. Many organizations only do those every 10 to 15 years, sometimes every 20 years. And generally they do them as a result of a strategic planning process that says, hey, we're about to outgrow our building, or we have to move or something, and we need a new building. Let's do a capital campaign. But if you think a little differently about this kind of fundraising, you realize that there are certain principles and practices of capital campaign fundraising that we will review with you in a bit, that you can apply to other kinds of fundraising. So we think about three kinds of campaigns. Capacity campaigns, as you can see the mountain in the middle, that tends to be a little less large and daunting than a capital campaign on the right. And an organization might do that every 3 to 5 years. That is literally a campaign, again, a special campaign to move the organization up from where it currently stands, to springboard the organization, if you wish, to the next level of operation. And it may include some building renovations or some kind of a smaller new addition, but it may just include things that will move the organization, like better systems, consultants or planning people to help with organizational planning, increased development staff, some money to be raised so you can bring on new staff earlier than you would otherwise, and that would cover those staff costs, at least in part, for some period of time. Right? If you think about what it is that's going to help move your organization forward so you can do more good more quickly, and what kinds of investments you would need, that's what you would do a capacity campaign for. And on the left, you see this littler mountain, which we think of as a mini campaign, which you really can do every year if you wish. And you can actually look to see, well, what are the things we have to raise money for? Are there some smaller things that aren't in our operating budget? Or are there some small things in our operating budget that we might want to develop a mini campaign using the principles of capital campaign fundraising, but designed to raise short-term funding that is typically less than either a capital campaign or a capacity campaign. Does that make sense?
Yeah, excellent. All right. You know, one of the things that you didn't mention that I always think of as part of a capacity campaign is technology and infrastructure. So these days, everybody probably needs more technology, systems, infrastructure. So that's just in addition to what you already said. Yeah. All right. So let's go through some phases of a campaign, and these apply to all types of campaigns, whether you're doing a mini campaign, a capacity campaign, a capital campaign, or another word maybe we haven't used yet, a comprehensive campaign. So a special fundraising effort that's over and above your normal annual fundraising. And so that's what we're talking about here today, really about special campaigns that you would do that are significantly over and above your annual campaign for special campaign objectives. So we've broken a campaign down into 7 phases. And so we're going to start over here in phase 1, which probably many of you are in pre-campaign planning. And so you'll notice that we have in pre-campaign planning, we're going to be talking about what are the project plans or creating the project plans, campaign objectives. So campaign objectives are really, what are you fundraising for? What is the campaign? What is the money for? The working goal is how much will those things cost? How much will your campaign objectives cost? And that is your initial working goal. That's how much you're working towards, the financial goal you're working towards. You want to draft a campaign case for support. That's why donors should give. Why would they care? A gift range chart we'll get into in detail is about the number and amount of gifts that you would need to raise in order to get to your goal. And a depth chart is a listing of individual donors. They could be corporations, foundations, or individuals who could potentially give those gifts. So in pre-campaign planning, you are going to want to work out all of those things. And you'll notice that on our timeline, each phase has a pretty wide range of a timeline, right? This is a campaign timeline here, but pre-campaign planning can take anywhere from 3 to 12 months, depending on where you are at with your organization.
You know, Amy, let me talk just for a second about timing. When
Yeah.
we work with people to do what we call mini campaigns, you can actually change months to weeks.
Yes.
I mean, you can do them in a very short period of time, sometimes with the same principles.
Yeah, that's a great point. And the vast majority of organizations are going to do an entire campaign within 12 to 36 months, let's say. So less than 3 years. You may have heard of some of these big organizations like universities doing billion-dollar campaigns where they're for 7 years or 10 years, but that's not the vast majority of campaigns. You want to, for a variety of reasons, both because you need the money, you want to start your project, you want to avoid volunteer and staff burnout. We really want to see you wrap up these campaigns within 3 years. All right, let's talk about feasibility studies. So the feasibility phase is when you test your plan with your lead donors and community leaders. You discuss the case for support and get feedback on that case from the people that you're talking to during feasibility. And you assess the giving potential. Is your working goal realistic? In campaign planning, that's the third phase. You're going to adjust your campaign plans based on what you heard in the feasibility study. You've gone out and you've talked to some key donors and leaders and potential supporters of your campaign during the feasibility study. So now it's time to go back and revise the working goal and your case for support, and you're going to finalize and develop your campaign plan, your official campaign plan. All right. The quiet phase, you'll notice this is potentially the longest phase of your campaign, and we expect that during this phase you are going to raise at least 65% of your dollars before you ever go public. So here you're going to solicit the leadership level gifts to your campaign, you're going to solicit your board members and your campaign volunteers, and hopefully those three groups will be giving you 60, 70, 80% of your campaign dollars. And so these are individual conversations that you're going to have one-on-one. You haven't sent out a press release or created a campaign brochure. These are individual conversations you're having with your top potential donors. Next, you're going to do your campaign kickoff. This is when you're ready to go public and you've raised at least 65% of your goal. And now it's time to officially announce the goal of your campaign. You are going to do a press release and have some kickoff celebration type events. Of course, they may look a little different now in COVID, but whatever they look like, small or large, you're going to have kickoff and celebration type events. Andrea, you want to add anything before I keep going?
Yes, thank you. I want to invite people to look carefully at this whole chart. And if you add up the months or the time from the first three phases, the pre-campaign planning, the feasibility study, and the campaign planning, you will see that if you're long in pre-campaign planning, which often is the case, these first three stages before you ask anybody for any money at all can take, a year and a half. So while Amy is certainly right that the quiet phase of the campaign, when you're asking for the largest gifts, is often longer than people understand, what really is longer is the part of the campaign where you're just getting ready for it. You're laying the groundwork. And that really can take 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to get yourself ready. that amount, that kind of planning is sometimes sets your campaign up for success. So these are more complicated processes at the front end than you might imagine.
I think that's so important, because so often we'll talk to an organization and somebody will say, well, our board's ready to start asking today or tomorrow. We have board members that are chomping at the bit. They're ready to go start asking your friends, their friends. And while that's amazing and wonderful, what happens is when you haven't planned well, is that your campaign gets off track quickly. It goes helter-skelter because board members are running around asking for money. You haven't quite worked out what they're asking for. They might be giving away naming opportunities that ultimately are inappropriate or don't make sense in the context of the campaign. They may ask for gifts that are completely the wrong amount. You know, they may ask their friend for $10,000 when that friend has the capacity to give $100,000. And so you really, really do want to take this planning, all of these planning phases very seriously and not race through them. It will set you up for success. The other thing that I want to really point out is that, you know, here in phase 5, we're announcing the campaign goal publicly. Up until this point, you've been using a working goal, and you should talk about it like a working goal, because what happens is during the quiet phase, if let's say you raise all of the gifts you ask for and more, everybody gives, then before you've announced a goal publicly, you have an opportunity to expand your project, raise your goal, and raise even more than you ever thought possible. You know, on the other hand, you may find during the quiet phase that not nearly the number of people give you the gifts or the size gifts that you were hoping for. And before you've announced anything publicly, you have an opportunity to scale back your project and reduce your goal. And then you can still have a successful campaign by announcing a different goal and successfully completing a slightly scaled back project. So I just want to make sure. Yeah.
No, I actually have two really quick and important stories about that. We're working with two different clients at the moment. One of them started out with an $8 million goal, and before they kick their campaign off, they will have reached, I believe, $11 million, right? All during the quiet phase of the campaign. Turns out they raised way more money from large gifts, I mean, multi-million-dollar gifts, than they had ever imagined. And because it was the quiet phase of the campaign, they could keep increasing their campaign goal. My guess is that they're going to increase it from 8 million to 13 million before all is said and done. On the other hand, another client we're working with started out some time ago with a $10 million goal. And what they're seeing now is that a couple of the largest gifts that they thought were going to be there didn't come in for various reasons beyond their control. So before they kick off, they're going to reduce their goal to 8 million. It will not have been a failed campaign. They will have tested high, and then they will have reconsidered before they go public. And everyone is then going to race to this, what the $8 million goal, and celebrate like mad a successful campaign when it's over. So campaigns really are quite fluid during this quiet phase of the campaign. And I think it's important to understand that. It's one of the magical things about campaigns.
Excellent. And now you're ready to go launch into the public phase. And you may notice that we have a shorter time period here than you may have thought. The public phase does not last years and years, as it does, unfortunately, in some campaigns. It shouldn't last a long time, is what I'm trying to say. And here you're going to solicit the base. This is when you go out to the community to ask for support. You re-solicit anybody who you've asked earlier that didn't commit yet, and you close the gap to your goal. And finally, in post-campaign, you are going to celebrate. You're going to express your gratitude again and again, and of course, send pledge reminders and wrap up the campaign. All right, Andrea, why don't you talk to us about a gift range chart?
I will in a second, Amy, although we have some really good questions here. So let me take just a second and see if I can address them. Thank you all so much for putting your questions out there. Abigail, you want more talk about capacity campaigns and what's involved. We will get to that. Sandrell has asked, for these campaigns, would you include your regular annual fund donors, or would you use a different group of potential donors? It's a wonderful question, and here's the answer to it. When you do a capital campaign, the people, for the most part, that you expect to get these large gifts from are people who already give to your organization. People who support your organization are used to giving annual recurring gifts to your organization, with whom you have a relationship. And you are going to them to ask them for special, bigger gifts for this special over and above project. So capital campaign money does not come from somewhere out there. It comes from right under your nose. I'll take one more question here. We are embarking on a feasibility study when COVID shut things down. When, in your opinion, is the right time to start back up? Yesterday. Right, Amy?
Yes, definitely yesterday. I know it's hard, but we had tons of organizations. We worked with tons of organizations that worked right through COVID, and they are stronger than ever right now. And we encourage you to start right this minute. Don't wait another day to start your feasibility study. Your project, unless the need for your project or your organization has changed significantly, which maybe it's increased, hopefully it hasn't gone away, then you're ready to start on your feasibility study.
Sandrell has asked one question, which will lead me right into the gift range chart. Sandrell wants to know, do I understand that before any campaign is made public, 65% of the goal must be raised through these entities? I would say, Sandrell, that for most organizations, it should be at least 65%. For some organizations that don't have a very broad base of donors, it might be 70 or 75 or even 80%. The bulk of the fundraising through a capital campaign happens before the campaign kickoff. And that brings us right to the gift range chart. Now, some of you may call this a donor pyramid. There are other things people call it. We call it gift range chart, a gift range chart. And really what it is a breakdown of your campaign goal in a rough formula that fits your organization, the size and shape of your organization's donor base. But it breaks down the goal and says, well, we need one gift for this $1 million campaign that you see on the screen. We need one gift of $250,000. We need one gift of $100,000. We need two gifts of $50,000, etc. Now you will see that we break this down into lead gifts, major gifts, and general gifts. And for this campaign, this organization would need 20 gifts. And in 20 gifts, how much would they raise, Amy, in 20 gifts? They would raise $700,000. Now, of a $1 million campaign, right, that is 70% of their campaign goal. And if you think about raising most of the lead gifts in the quiet phase of the campaign, and you're successful or more than successful, then in the quiet phase of the campaign, you will have raised 70% of your campaign goal. Of course, what's going to happen is that to get those gifts, you are going to need multiple prospects, right? It's not realistic to imagine that you're going to have one person to ask for $250,000 and they're going to say yes, and one for $100,000 and they're going to say yes, right? Not everyone you ask for these large gifts is going to give at the level that you ask them. So you may ask someone for $250,000, they may end up giving you $25,000. You may ask someone for $25,000, they may end up giving you $5,000. So as you ask people at the top of the gift range chart, and you can see on the right, you can see how many prospects you need for each of those gifts, right? We need 50 prospects to get 20 gifts. Of those 50 prospects, some are going to give the lead gift level and some are going to give lower gifts. So as you ask people for gifts at the lead gift level, you have what I think of as a waterfall effect, namely that you're beginning to fill in the midsection of your gift range chart as well. This gift range chart is really a fundamental campaign tool. It is what organizes the way you think about your campaigns. In campaigns, we solicit gifts from the top down. and from the inside out. So we solicit our board members, those are who are closest to us first, and we solicit the people who could give us the largest gifts. If you follow that, then your campaign will make sense, and you will build credibility and confidence as you go. To summarize what we just looked at, in the leadership level donors, you will have to bring in 20 gifts from 50 prospects to raise 70% of your campaign goal. Now, I have been in capital campaign fundraising my entire career, would you believe? Which, if you could see me, you would know it's a long career. And this chart illustrates what I love about capital campaigns, because I can imagine wrapping my brain around how I'm going to bring in 20 gifts in a way that is quite different than if you told me to bring in 500 or 1,000 gifts, right? I can take this and say 20 gifts. All right, I need 50 donors. Let me make a list of all the people who might give at these top levels, and then let me make a plan for each of them. And then I can wrap my arms around that. I can wrap my brain around that. I know what to do when I come into work in the morning and say, okay, how am I going to move this campaign forward? Because all I've got to do is to bring in 20 gifts. And that's just empowering. Don't you think, Amy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you cannot come up with a list of 50 people, and I don't mean just you, but looking at your donor base, talking to your board members, talking to others in the community, if you can't come up with a list of 50 people that potentially can give 70% of your goal, you may not be able to raise that goal. So it is a pretty simple formula. You know, campaigns can be overwhelming, but you know, whether it's a $1 million goal or a $100 million goal, the formula really is the same. And I know it's hard to imagine, but it really is the same. All right.
Now, let me just say one more thing, and it does ping off a question that somebody has asked. You could look at that gift range chart, which we've done for $1 million, and you could take a couple zeros off it. You could say, okay, what if we have a campaign to raise $100,000? Well, guess what? You're going to do exactly the same thing, only there are going to be fewer zeros. But the principles are the same. So don't be frustrated by saying these goals are huge and big and we are a little organization. I have actually worked with an artist on a capital campaign to raise $12,000. I did exactly the same thing with her. I guided her through this process with a gift range chart and the whole thing. Only her top gift at $12,000 was, I think it was $2,500. Her top gift had to be $2,500 on $12,000. Principles the same. Okay, Amy, you're on to principles.
All right, let's talk about, oh, excuse me, 6 principles of campaign fundraising. All campaigns need these things. So number 1 is specific objectives. What are you raising money for? And if we're talking about capacity campaigns, we talked about all sorts of things before. Infrastructure, technology, programs, whatever is going to catapult your organization to the next level. If you're doing, you know, more traditional capital campaign, a specific objective might be a building, but even for a capacity campaign, you might be raising money for equipment, right? So lots of things, but those are your specific objectives, knowing what you're raising money for. So when we say specific objectives, if you have in mind that you want to raise have an endowment campaign, that's not specific enough, right? So we can talk about that later. I don't know if that was a good example to bring up right now, but a lot of organizations do come up to us and say, you know, we want to have an endowment campaign. And, you know, of course, every organization wants to grow their campaign or their endowment. But those aren't specific objectives for a campaign. An endowment might be a piece of your campaign. It might be one of the objectives. Focus on lead gifts. So that's what Andrea just talked about. So we're not going right immediately out to the whole community. we can't raise a capital campaign or a capacity campaign goal in $100 gifts. So if anybody on your board is thinking that they want to start a campaign with a mailing a brochure, you can say, no, 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 we have to start focusing on lead gifts. The brochure and the community fundraising, that's for the very end of the campaign. First, we need to start with the lead gifts. And that brings us to, oh, excuse me, top-down, inside-out fundraising. So that means that the order in which we fundraise for a campaign is very specific. Top-down, we start with those top gifts. And inside out means we start with the people closest to our organization before going out to the general community. And the reason for this is if we didn't have a specific order and we wanted to raise $1 million and the first gift we asked for was $100, then the next donor we went to would say, you know, I don't think you're going to get there. You've only raised $100. But if we want to raise $1 million and the first gift is $200,000, then the next donor says, all right, you're on a roll. I want to get on board. This is exciting. So we have to start at the top so that there's momentum. And then when the smaller donors chip in at the very end of the campaign, we can say to them, all right, your gift now matters as much as anybody's gift because it's going to get us over the finish line, and it's super exciting. So inside out, we're going to start, like we said, with our board members, our staff, you know, our volunteers, people closest to the organization, our lead donors. Personal solicitation, critical. This is not mass fundraising. There's no crowdsourcing, certainly not at the beginning of the campaign, maybe in the public phase at the very end. But it all starts with and stems from individual one-on-one solicitation. And I saw a question in the question box. We're talking about individuals. We're also talking about foundations, corporations, but it's really a personal solicitation. It's not in a group. It's not bulk solicitation. But yes, some of these lead gifts can come from foundations or corporations. Number 5 is the quiet. There is a quiet phase and a public phase. This is an important principle of campaign fundraising that maybe your board members don't quite understand why it's so critical to have the quiet phase. And hopefully it makes sense to you now that we showed you the timeline. First, we're going to talk with our lead donors in a less public way, so that if we do down the road need to change the goal or scale up or down the project, we can do that and work that out in a quiet phase before we make a big public announcement. And then, of course, the public phase is critical. We do want to rally the community. We do want to invite everybody to participate. We do want everybody to be excited. But those are 2 specific and distinct phases. And finally, we have a specific timetable. So there is an order, there is a timeline. We don't want to drag this out forever. All right, Andrea, what would you like to add?
Yes, I want to pick up a few questions. There have been great questions people are posing. Some of them I can answer quite quickly, so I think we can fit some in. So we have here a question: what do you say to executive leadership who don't believe that a feasibility study is valuable because they're going to go and they got to raise the money anyway, willy-nilly? Here's what you do, Abigail. You don't call it a feasibility study. You call it a campaign planning study. Right? No one's going to object to that. They object to it when it's a feasibility study and it implies that you might or might not do the campaign. But a campaign planning study, and many consultants actually standardly call it that. So change your language a bit. You might find that that helps you. Dana, this is being recorded and the recording and the slides will be available. Susan, where do these huge gifts come from? You know, they're only huge proportionately, first of all, and the people on the board don't need to be the people with it. All of you are teachers on the board and no one has huge resources. No one expects you to go rob a bank, right? But you do need to be talking to people that you know and in your community who have large resources and see if this is a project that's going to excite them. So you don't want to be going to those people first asking them for money. You want to be talking to them and bringing them in perhaps to a steering committee or a planning committee so that you can get their help and assistance on the campaign. Okay, I think Amy picked this up. Should grants contribute to the campaign total? Sure. Foundation, corporations, individuals, though you should know that for the most part, campaign funding comes from individuals, sometimes through family foundations, but we think of those as individual gifts. Linda, how to actually keep the quiet phase quiet. And I do want to address this. The community already knows about the need and the master plan. The only thing you're really trying to keep quiet is the final goal. And this addresses another question. In the early phase of the campaign, you can be talking about the project. You can be sharing your plans with people, but you don't want to be saying, we are having a campaign to raise $10 million. What you want to be saying is, we are in the process of doing a fundraising campaign. We have a working goal that may change as our fundraising proceeds, and we will be announcing the goal a bit later in our process. So talk about a working goal. That is a standard campaign phrase, and what it means really is a draft goal. So you can keep that relatively flexible. That's why you don't want a campaign brochure that says we're raising a $10 million in the early phases of the campaign. Largest gifts are not raised with printed fancy material. They are raised with draft stamps saying this, and you say to your donors, this campaign goal may change, right? We want you to consider a gift based on this goal, but understand this is a working goal and may change. If it changes significantly, you will go back to them and say, here's what's going on. All right, let's see, tips on managing them. I think I just did that one. And should the public phase be timed for end of year to maximize seasonal giving? Not necessarily. Often you actually want to have the public phase so that it stays away from your annual fundraising, so that it doesn't fit on top. Now you can ask for both gifts at the same time, but you can, it's not uncommon for an organization to have the public phase in the spring going into the summer or in the fall before your standard big push for annual fundraising. It's not impossible, but I'm not sure it's what you would want. All right, Amy, I think I should jump back in, don't you think?
Yes, those are excellent questions. Keep them coming.
Yes, we'll do our best to have another question session in a minute. So let's talk a little about these mini campaigns. Whoever raised the question about not having large donors, let's say that you want a campaign to raise $10,000 or $100,000, right? And you know specifically what it is you want to raise money for. It is something special that will move your organization up. You might want to consider a mini campaign, a short-term campaign to raise $50,000 or $100,000. It will have all of the elements of the campaign that Amy went over. You need to be clear about what you want to raise money for and how much money you want to raise. You need a gift range chart. You need to start with the largest donors and go down from there, and the people who are closest to you inside. You need a timetable. And Amy, what else was on that list?
Yeah, a campaign budget.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
All of the same things. Now you need all of the same things in a capacity campaign. A capacity campaign is often somewhat bigger and happens every 3 to 5 years. And the kind of thing you're going to raise money for in a capacity campaign is something that, again, grows out of some kind of a planning process. Maybe your organization has decided to start a new program. So maybe you would be raising startup funds for that new program that would enable you to bring on staff, would provide an influx of cash, of money, and would gradually, the amount of money that comes from the campaign to the staff would gradually go down as your annual fundraising picks up. Because capital campaigns are not the vehicle by which you can raise long-term money for sustained staff support. But you can say, we're going to provide 3 years of staff support in declining amounts through this campaign so we can get this new program started pronto because the need out there is so important. I worked years ago for an organization that raised money for a new scheduling system. It was a medical organization, and they scheduled a lot of medical appointments. And what they said was that if they had this fairly sophisticated scheduling system, they could greatly increase the efficiency of the organization and could see many more people because of this new, I would almost say newfangled, because of this new system whereby people could schedule online or whatever it was. That was a typical capacity campaign idea, because they could raise, I don't know what it was anymore, $100,000 for this whole new system, and lo and behold, the number of visits they would see from that would increase by 25%, right? An increase in capacity with a short one-term infusion of cash to improve their systems. And there are many other things that might be in that, but that's just one example of that. And then, of course, we have the big mother of capital campaign fundraising. And in case you wondered, that really is Mount Everest. It is a profile, a simplified picture of Mount Everest. And we believe that an organization every 10 or 15 or perhaps 20 years should do a major campaign. You should be thinking at some point, sort of without limits. You should say, if we had $10 million more or $5 million or whatever is in proportion to your organization, what could we do to radically improve and increase the number of services we're doing? And if we're thinking about a new building, right, or I mean, all kinds of things that might go into that, yes, you should be thinking about doing that every 10, 15, 20 years, because in doing that, you are going to raise the sights, not only of your staff and your board, but also of your donors. So we think you should be doing all of these and basing all of them on the campaign principles that we've gone over. Amy, you want to add something?
I think we can move on to our next poll. So let's talk about our next poll. So what's most important to build your organization's capacity? Bradley, you're going to launch. Excellent. Thank you so much. All right. So the question is, are you looking for better systems, fundraising staff, new programs, endowment, or of course, all of the above? So let's go ahead and give you 10 or 15 seconds. You know, these are all things that, depending on the organization and what stage and phase you're in of the life cycle of your organization, you might need one or more of these, or several of them, or of course, all of them.
Yeah, and just make sure after you choose your option, you just hit that submit button, and we'll give it 5 to 10 more seconds, and then we'll go ahead and close this poll up.
Excellent. It is important to think about, what are you raising money for? What do you want to have a campaign for? Donors are motivated by really important objectives, campaign objectives. Andrea, did you want to jump in and say something?
Yeah, a lot of people have put fundraising staff, so I just want to address that for a minute, because unlike any other kind of staff, fundraising staff really does build capacity. If you bring someone in to do more fundraising and they're going to raise significant amounts of money, more than you could raise otherwise, you can make a pretty good case for that in your capacity campaign. What you have to be careful of, again, is that these kinds of campaigns are not good for sustaining staff positions. They are good for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years of staff positions. But you need a plan that says, okay, once the 3 years, once the infusion of money from the campaign is gone, how is the staff going to be supported? And that has to come through your general operating fundraising. So we have a whole bunch of other questions here, Amy, and you guys are doing just a great job of asking questions. Josiah wants to know, when we talk about prospects, I assume you're talking about qualified prospects. Yes, we are. And let me tell you really quickly what a qualified prospect is. We think about them as being ABC prospects. Those are people who have the ability to give significant gifts, people you have reason to believe, believe in your mission. That's B. And C is people with whom you have direct contact, right? So chances are Oprah Winfrey wouldn't be in that group, right? Chances are all the rich people that you see on television are unlikely to be in that group because you don't have a C to them. They may have money, maybe they're interested in what you're doing, but you have no immediate way to be in good contact with them. So take those people off your list. They are not qualified prospects. All right.
All right, let's keep going, Andrea, because I want you to have enough time to talk about how to test the case and the working goal in just a minute.
Got it. Yeah.
And also we want to make sure to give everybody a good roadmap for their campaign.
Good.
All right.
Yes.
So let's first talk about how you will create a plan for increasing capacity. That's what you're here to do, hopefully. So it starts out with a discussion at the board level. So do you want to create a plan for increasing capacity? What does that look like? What does that mean? And then they can decide that there should be an ad hoc committee to develop that early plan. And so taking a few key board members and staff members to really flesh things out. Then once you have that initial plan, and we talked about a few things being in that plan, we need, of course, campaign objectives. What do you want to raise money for? A working goal, how much will all those objective costs? And then that initial case for support about why people should give. That's what the ad hoc committee is doing. And then a feasibility study, a fundraising feasibility study to test that plan with lead donors. And then a board decision to move forward. So that's how we create a real plan for increasing capacity and deciding to have a campaign generally of $1 million or more. Of course, we've talked about 3 types of campaigns: a mini campaign that would probably be under $1 million, maybe significantly under $1 million, maybe $50,000 or $100,000. It would go towards immediate need, short-term impact, and programs and services. A capacity campaign, which is really what we're focusing on here today. Generally, they're $1 million or more to increase impact, create startup programs, technology, infrastructure, marketing, and building endowment. And then finally, really traditionally a capital campaign, or maybe a comprehensive campaign that includes all your fundraising for a real leap in growth, maybe a building or renovation, and of course endowment growth as well. All right, Andrea, let's talk about briefly how to test the case and the working goal. I think this is such an important process for anybody thinking about getting into a campaign.
Yes. So I talked earlier just briefly, people tend to call these things feasibility studies, but you can call them campaign planning studies. In fact, there are people who have been in this business a long time who really advocate for shifting the language. We use the word feasibility study like we use the word capital campaign because they are sort of the language people use, and we don't want to change. We're not able to change that easily, but be aware of that. So there is a traditional feasibility study where you hire a consultant to go and talk to your largest donors, right? They work with you to develop the case. They work with you to identify a list of the people who could give those top 20 gifts. We were 50 people who could give those 20 gifts we were talking about. And the consultant will go out and have confidential conversations with those donors and come back to you and say, we've talked to all these donors, this is how much money we think you can raise. That's a traditional study. It used to be that the rule of thumb for how much they cost is somewhere, if you take the number of interviews a consultant's going to do and multiply it by $1,200 or $1,500, that's probably what it's going to cost for a consultant to do a study like that. Now, it's going to vary study to study depending on travel needs, for example, but they're fairly pricey. You can do it yourself, DIY donor conversations, where you decide, all right, let's identify 10 or 15 or 20 people that we know are going to be our lead gifts. And why don't we go and talk to them early about this project and see what they think, and then put our heads together. That's a perfectly good way to do it if you are capable and competent and willing to do that. What it doesn't do is to build credibility in your board. There's something about bringing someone in from the outside who is a campaign expert that will make your board feel more confident than if you on the inside just did it. So we've come up with a hybrid model where we work with organizations, helping them do a feasibility study or a campaign planning study, but they do the interviews, right? We help them develop the case, we help them understand how to do the study, we help them collate the information, we help them put the material together, but they are the people who are having the conversations. And this is a new innovation in the field. We have had remarkable good fortune with it, or I suppose it's not good fortune. What we're finding is that the system works and has multiple benefits that we never even anticipated. It's less expensive than a traditional study, but provides more credibility than a DIY study.
Well, Andrea, I think you've left out the most critical piece of the guided model, and that is that when organizational leaders, when you go out and talk to your potential lead donors, it is really a unique opportunity to go build relationships with these potential lead donors prior to asking them for a gift. And so if you are sending a consultant out to have those conversations, potentially, I mean, to me, you're missing a huge relationship building opportunity. It's really a unique opportunity to ask for advice. You've probably heard the expression in fundraising that one of the key ways to fundraise is to go out to your donors and ask for advice. Well, asking for advice on a campaign case for support is a really, really wonderful way to go ask your donors for advice and feedback. It's genuine, it's authentic, and then you've built those relationships and you're comfortable talking to them way before you need to ask for a campaign gift.
Thank you for that, Amy. That's exactly right. I was just sort of on a roll, but
Yeah.
You're exactly right. It's so important. I'm so glad you brought it up. So Amy, do we have time for a couple more questions, or?
Yeah, let's just give everybody, we promised a roadmap for a campaign. So let's do that. So number 1, board discussion, right? 2 is ad hoc committee to develop the early plan. We went through this. Feasibility to test the plan, and board decision to move forward. I just want to make sure that everybody recognizes that's the roadmap for getting ready for a campaign. We will stick around to answer questions for the next 5 to 10 minutes, but I do want to let everybody know that we have a free campaign roadmap, checklist, and timeline available for you at the Capital Campaign Toolkit website. So if you want to go over to our website, we will give you our complete campaign roadmap, checklist, and timeline. And it's a wonderful way to kickstart your campaign. Also, if you have questions that we don't answer or today, or you would like to talk to us and ask us very specific questions about your campaign, we would love to talk to you about it. There's no obligation, totally free. So go to the capitalcampaigntoolkit.com and you can sign up to have a strategy session with me or Andrea or one of our colleagues. And we would love to talk to you about your campaign and answer any questions you may have. So yes, Andrea, let's go to questions, but people can also email us, and our email addresses are, of course, on the screen.
Yes, excellent. All right, let me, so Sandra's asked, is it appropriate to discuss ongoing funding needs along with campaign needs at the same time? It sure is. You know, you're going to be asking people for gifts that are over and above their regular giving. So perhaps you're talking to a donor who gives you $1,000 a year regularly, or more or less. You're going to want to say, you know, Mr. Smith, we so appreciate your $1,000 a year. That money is fundamental to our organization. It keeps us going. Collectively, it takes this much money to keep this organization going. And now we are asking you to consider a gift of $25,000 to help us move the bar on the work that we're planning to do. So these two things fit together. We often think about these as, you know, annual fundraising is recurring gifts, and donors give recurring gifts, but they also will give special gifts, and it's perfectly appropriate to talk about them both. When do you do the public phase for smaller gifts? So here's the answer to that. You don't want to kick off your campaign until you are quite sure that with smaller gifts, you can actually reach your goal. So you need to do some math and some analysis to say, well, of our base and our broad base, as we do this broad-based campaign, how much money do we think we can raise? How many gifts are still outstanding from the larger asks? You need to do the math, and that's going to give you the dollar amount that you need to raise to kick off before you go more broadly. Let's see. What are your thoughts on a capacity campaign to help set up a giving circle? I don't know. Amy, you have a thought about that?
I don't see the question. Ask it again. Let's come back to that one.
Yeah, okay. You will get a recording. Here's a question: during the public phase, do you indicate in the letter or brochure the amount or percentage that has been raised? Sure, you can say, let's say it's $1 million campaign. It's really compelling when you go more broad to say we've already raised $800,000. We only need to raise $200,000 to get to our goal. And guess what? Against $200,000, someone's $1,000 gift or $5,000 gift or $500 gift is going to feel like something. It doesn't feel like something on the $1 million goal, but if you highlight the gap, what's still left to raise, all of a sudden those small gifts feel more important. So by all means.
All right, how about, what about fundraising consultants instead of staff? Yeah, that's a good one.
Bad idea.
Go ahead.
Bad idea. That's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, bad idea. So listen, we feel at the Capital Campaign Toolkit that what we do is we empower staff to lead successful campaigns. We're a comprehensive support system. So we provide campaign staff, or I should say nonprofit leaders and nonprofit staff, with all the tools, resources, and guidance they need to lead a successful campaign. You know, the reason not to have a consultant or an outsider do it is they are never going to be as committed to your community, your cause, know your donors as well as an outsider will. So a campaign is really an opportunity to increase your staff and increase your capacity in so many ways. Hopefully at the end of the campaign, you're going to be able to keep that staff member on, and they will have developed and built relationships with members of your community and be truly engaged in all aspects of your organization. You don't need to have an outsider doing that. A staff member is going to be more cost effective. They're full-time, totally dedicated to you. So campaign consultants and outsiders, yes, to bring guidance and support and expertise to your campaign, but staff should be in there in the trenches doing the work.
So Wendell has asked this. We just finished a feasibility study and are wondering when to take the campaign public. We have some key leadership out of the picture for a month or so. Wendell, you need to put together your gift range chart. If you did a feasibility study, you probably have one. You don't want to go public until you have solicited the people who will give those top gifts, and until you have raised at least 60% of have commitments for at least 60%, maybe 70%. I don't know the shape of your organization, of your money. Then you're going to go public. The public phase of the campaign, if you remember our timeline, is short. And it's short because you need to muster a lot of energy. You want everyone in the community buzzing about your campaign during that public phase of the campaign. And no one can sustain that for very long. So I'm happiest when the quiet phase of the campaign is under 2 months. That means the rest of the campaign, the quiet phase, extends until you are ready, until you've raised all that front end money. And the public phase is just short and full of energy and visibility.
All right, Andrea, I think our time is just about up. I just want to encourage people to reach out to us. Our email addresses are on the screen. I would love for you to visit capitalcampaigntoolkit.com. We've got tons of free resources for you. And of course, you can sign up and just ask us your questions one-on-one. Bradley, thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you, Bradley. And thanks to all of you who submitted such amazing questions. You really got your fingers going today. It made it fun for us to kind of switch back and forth to be able to answer your questions. So we really appreciate how much you were a part of this webinar.
Yeah, and Amy and Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time to answer those questions, keep it conversational. It makes it such a better experience for everyone. Thanks, everyone. Again, I'll echo, thank you for attending. Be on the lookout for the email with the slide deck and the recording of the session. But thanks so much, and hope everyone has a good rest of your Wednesday and the rest of the week. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.